Medieval people had no modern gadgets, yet somehow made filthy pond water safer to drink than most bottled water today. What they discovered about cleaning, it will absolutely surprise you. Back when your biggest concern was whether the local lord would hike taxes again, people still had to find ways to get drinkable water. Here's the truth. Most families did not live anywhere near a crystal spring. They had that murky village pond where ducks paddled and livestock wandered freely. And yes, that included the same pond where old Martha's goat did its daily business. So how did medieval folks handle it? They improvised with whatever they could find. Cloth filtering became the household trick everyone used. The method was beautifully simple. Take a piece of fabric, linen if possible, though wool also worked, and fold it several times. Then pour that sketchy pond water through it very slowly. You needed the patience of a saint to do it right. Rush it, and all the filth went straight through. The result was much clearer water. Most of the floating leaves, bugs, and mysterious brown specks stayed behind in the fabric. It was not exactly crystal clear, but it looked drinkable compared to the swamp soup that went in. Every home had scraps of old fabric lying around, so this solution was nearly free. Worn tunics, torn bedding, and leftover sewing cloth all found new life as makeshift filters. Travelers used the same trick. When you were miles from the nearest village and your only option looked like dragon bath water, you made do. Many used their own sleeves as filters. It was not glamorous, but it could keep you alive. The real genius of this trick was how easy it was. No rare materials, no special tools, just fabric and gravity working together. But people understood something important. This step only removed the visible grime. The water might still taste bad or hide sickness that could drop you faster than bad ale. So the clever ones added extra steps. They layered their methods, and that idea of layers led to a major breakthrough. They discovered something brilliant right under their feet. Sand and gravel could do a far better job than cloth alone. These were not just random piles of dirt. They were organized filters that actually worked. The process was surprisingly smart. First, they used a wooden trough or a carved stone basin. Then came the special layering. Large gravel went at the bottom, smaller gravel above that, and a thick layer of sand on top. Some creative monks even added pieces of charcoal between layers, experimenting to see what worked best. To use it, you poured the murky water slowly over the sand. Gravity did the rest. As the water trickled through, the sand caught the mud, leaves, and dead bugs. The gravel below trapped anything that escaped the upper layers. What came out was much cleaner, even if not perfect. Water that had looked like brown sludge often came out clear enough to drink without gagging. Big monasteries where hundreds of monks needed daily water built permanent sand filter tanks. They used these for cooking, washing, and even brewing, but maintaining them was exhausting. That top layer of sand got filthy fast. All the junk stayed behind, forming a smelly slime that had to be scraped off often. Someone had to do that dirty job, and it was never the abbot. Imagine telling people you scraped pond muck for a living. Not the most glamorous career path. The irony was that keeping the filter clean could take more work than finding a clean spring elsewhere. Still, these systems saved lives, especially in crowded towns where walking for fresh water was not possible. Even though people did not understand germs, they knew cleaner water meant fewer illnesses. Their methods were simple trial and error, backed by observation. And they discovered something even better than sand filters. Something far simpler, far more reliable, and needing no maintenance at all. When their water looked like it might crawl out of the bucket by itself, medieval families knew what to do. They fired up the hearth and got that water boiling. Maybe it looked like witchcraft, but it worked. Boiling was not new to them. People realized long ago that heating water made it safer to drink. They could not explain why, but they saw the results. Those who boiled their water got sick less often than those who didn't. They had no clue about bacteria, but they understood cause and effect. Through pure necessity and clever observation, medieval folks turned dirty pond water into something that could sustain entire communities. Sometimes the simplest observations led to the smartest habits. But here's the catch. Firewood wasn't exactly easy to come by. Well, technically it did grow on trees, but chopping it down was no small task. Every log had to be cut, dried, and stored for future use. That's why boiling water became a last resort when times were tough or when someone in the family started feeling sick. The process was simple enough. Fill the biggest pot you owned, get the fire roaring, and wait some more. Boiling took patience, especially when you needed enough clean water for everyone in the household. Clever families learned to make the most of their efforts by boiling large batches at once, letting it cool, and then storing it in covered jars for later. Then there were those extra careful types. These were the medieval version of overprotective parents, except instead of watching over kids, they hovered over pots of water. They'd boil the pond water once, cool it, then boil it again just to be extra sure. It was a lot of work, but when little Thomas's stomach was on the line, no one took chances. Tea drinkers had an unexpected advantage during this time. They were already heating water for their daily brew, so they ended up with clean drinking water as a side benefit. The same thing happened when people cooked meals or made herbal medicines. Resourceful cooks solved two problems with one fire. But there was one thing they couldn't avoid: the taste. Boiled pond water often lost its character completely. It tasted flat and dull, like someone drained all the life out of it. To make it more bearable, families would mix in herbs or let it sit in clay pots to pick up earthy flavors again. When things got really bad, like during plagues or when their regular water sources turned foul, entire villages teamed up for boiling sessions. Neighbors shared firewood and worked in shifts to keep the flames alive through the night. But not everyone had enough wood to keep that going. That's when people began getting creative with whatever they could find around the house. That's where charcoal entered the picture. It wasn't just for heating homes or cooking food. It became a secret tool for cleaning water. When wood burns properly, it leaves behind charcoal filled with countless tiny holes, perfect for trapping everything that makes water taste like swamp soup. Medieval people discovered this by accident. Someone probably dropped a piece of charcoal into a bucket and noticed it didn't taste as bad afterward. They didn't understand the science, but they knew it worked. Some families began mixing chunks of charcoal into sand filters. Picture layers of pebbles, sand, and charcoal working together like a mini water treatment system. As the water trickled through, the charcoal grabbed onto anything that smelled like old fish or rotten plants. They didn't know it, but they had created something close to what we call activated carbon today. They only knew burned wood made their water taste better. Some households even crushed the charcoal into smaller bits for stronger results. For storage, people would toss a few pieces into their jars of water and leave them overnight. The charcoal kept improving the flavor, soaking up whatever nasty odors were left. In a way, they had invented the earliest version of a Brita filter, built entirely from campfire scraps. Making charcoal wasn't complicated either. Every home already had a fire going for cooking or heating, so it was easy to collect the leftover charcoal. Those who lived near the worst ponds took things further, building small ovens dedicated to charcoal making. The best part? The method still works today. Modern water filters use activated charcoal for the same reasons medieval peasants did. They stumbled upon a scientific miracle without knowing a thing about chemistry. Charcoal helped with taste and smell, but what about all that mud and grime floating around? That's where another tool came into play: patience. Sometimes the best purification method needed no tools at all, just time and gravity. Imagine a bucket of muddy pond water that looks like chocolate milk. Disgusting, right? But if you leave that same bucket untouched for half a day, something amazing happens. All the dirt, stones, mud, and tiny bugs slowly sink to the bottom. The trick was figuring out the right moment to pour it off. Too soon and the water stayed cloudy. Wait too long and things might start growing inside. Most people learned that overnight was just the right amount of time. Then came the careful part, pouring out the clean water without stirring the muck below. It took steady hands and patience. One wrong move and you'd be back to square one. Villages took this idea and made it bigger. They dug shallow settling ponds where water could rest for days before anyone touched it. These weren't random holes in the ground. They were the community's quiet, low-effort water filters, powered by time and common sense. They built these ponds with a gentle slope so that the cleanest water naturally gathered at one end, far from where the dirty flow entered. This was where medieval ingenuity truly stood out. Many households even used a clever two-bucket method that would make modern engineers proud. The first bucket served only one purpose, settling. No one drank directly from it. The second bucket was filled carefully with only the clear top layer from the first. Some families became so skilled at this that they could judge the quality of the water simply by glancing at the sediment. Thick, dark sludge meant the pond was filthy. Pale, sandy layers at the bottom meant the water source was cleaner to begin with. Wealthier people took it a step further and used special pouring vessels with long curved spouts. These designs made it easier to pour the water without stirring up the settled dirt. Strangely enough, this method worked better than most would expect. Gravity not only pulled down the visible dirt, but also helped separate other types of impurities by density. The heavy grit sank first, while lighter organic matter slowly drifted downward, leaving a clear layer on top. Of course, this method only removed what the eye could see. It did nothing for the unseen microbes that caused sickness. To handle those invisible threats, medieval people had to get even more creative. That is when nature itself came to their rescue. They might not have known modern science, but they did make one very smart discovery about water and sunlight. People began to notice that water left out in the sun for a day or two somehow tasted fresher and caused fewer stomach troubles. Those old stone jugs were not just decoration. People filled them with questionable pond water and left them out under direct sunlight. The sun warmed the water slowly throughout the day, and something remarkable happened. Not magic, but simple natural power at work. Sunlight can actually kill germs. It takes several hours, but the invisible rays in sunlight act like tiny soldiers attacking harmful bacteria. Medieval villagers had no idea what ultraviolet light was, but they noticed that sun-warmed water made them feel healthier. They were sharper than many give them credit for. The heat helped as well, speeding up the settling of dirt and discouraging the slimy creatures that preferred cold darkness. As the water sat warming in those heavy stone jars, its flavor changed too. The swampy taste faded, replaced by something far more drinkable. But here is where things got even more interesting. The summer heat often caused ponds to shrink, concentrating the remaining water. That might sound like a bad thing, but in practice, it was helpful. The shrinking ponds left most of the scum and algae in the shallow edges, while the center water stayed clearer. People simply avoided the sides and gathered their water from the middle. Another helpful trick involved fresh air. Leaving the jars uncovered in sunny places allowed air to flow through the liquid. It worked like letting wine breathe, except instead of enhancing flavor, the air carried away bad odors and added clean oxygen. A few particularly observant families realized that clear glass jars worked even better than stone containers. The glass allowed more sunlight to pass directly into the water rather than just heating the surface. Unfortunately, glass was rare and costly, so most people kept using their sturdy stone vessels. This method demanded patience. There were no instant results like with boiling. You had to plan ahead and leave the jars out in bright light for at least 6 to 8 hours, sometimes longer. The more time, the better the outcome. It makes you wonder what other simple tricks our ancestors might have known, but never wrote down. And speaking of forgotten wisdom, wait until you hear about the plant-based cleaning techniques they used. Medieval people did not just toss random greenery into their buckets and hope for the best. They had genuine methods that worked, even if they could not explain the science behind them. The real champions of this natural chemistry were moringa seeds. These tiny seeds could turn cloudy swamp water into something nearly clear and safe to drink. The process was straightforward. People would crush the seeds, sprinkle them into dirty pond water, and then watch the results. Within an hour, the floating dirt would begin to clump together and sink. The seeds released natural proteins that acted like magnets, binding everything unwanted. Different regions had their own favorite ingredients. Some communities swore by crushed almonds or even ground acorns. The tannins inside acorns worked especially well at gathering impurities. One old record even mentioned a specific formula: 3 crushed nuts for every bucket of water. That is surprisingly precise for a people who supposedly knew nothing about chemistry. Then there were those who used herbs. Mint leaves added flavor, but also helped fight bacteria. Sage worked too, though it made the water a bit bitter. Families sometimes added fresh thyme to their water jars, letting it steep overnight before drinking. But perhaps the strangest technique involved tree bark. Willow bark contained a natural compound called salicin, which we now know has antiseptic effects. People would scrape off the inner bark, boil it briefly, and then pour the cooled liquid into their pond water. They believed it prevented stomach illness and called it bitter water medicine. Meanwhile, those who lived near oak forests had another powerful helper: oak galls. These round growths on oak trees were full of tannins, and villagers discovered they could use them to make their water safer and better tasting. Those strange round lumps that grew on oak trees were full of tannins strong enough to clear dirty water faster than almost anything else. People would crush these marble-sized growths and toss them into buckets like homemade water tablets. What truly amazes me is how this wisdom traveled across continents. Wandering traders and pilgrims carried these techniques from village to village. A clever trick used in northern England might appear in a small French town just a few years later. No written guides, no printed manuals, just word of mouth spreading life-saving knowledge. Some families treated their water purification methods like family treasures. They passed down exact mixtures of herbs, nuts, and seeds that worked best with their local ponds. When you think about it, that made perfect sense. Clean water meant life. Even with all their natural filters and purifiers, medieval people understood one thing above all else. The location of the water source was the most important factor. The finest herbs on earth could not fix a poisoned pond. People of the Middle Ages were far from foolish about water. They quickly realized that not all ponds were safe, and some were downright dangerous. Where your water came from could determine whether your family stayed healthy or ended up bedridden. A pond sitting at the foot of a hill where every farm animal decided to relieve itself? Absolutely not. But a spring-fed pond, or one filled by clean rainwater running off stone hills, that was worth the journey. The observant villagers became water detectives long before the word scientist even existed. They noticed that ponds near grazing fields always made people sick more often. It made sense too. Animals had terrible hygiene, and their waste flowed downhill straight into the water supply. And then there were the still ponds, covered with green slime and thick with bugs. Everyone knew better than to drink from those. They avoided them like poison, which, in truth, they often were. Instead, people traveled to find water that actually moved, trickled, or bubbled. Here is where things get fascinating. Entire families would walk incredible distances just for good water. Grandma would hobble along with her walking stick. Little Tomas would drag his bucket behind him, and the whole clan would head out like a parade. Meanwhile, a murky pond sat right outside their door, untouched. They knew the risks. A few brave souls even moved their entire homes when the local pond went bad. Imagine tearing up your life, loading your chickens, your cooking pots, and your vegetable stores, all because the village water had turned foul. Yet it happened more than most people realize. Smart communities built what could be called water wisdom. It was knowledge passed through generations. Old Henrik might tell young Jakob, never drink from the pond where the miller cleans his wool, or from that shiny green pool by the tannery, because it will twist your stomach for days. They did not need scientific proof. They trusted patterns, stories, and careful observation. Over centuries, that collective memory saved countless lives. Some places even had unofficial water testers, usually kids with good eyesight and sharp noses. These young scouts would check which ponds smelled rotten or looked suspicious and report their findings to the adults. No one worried about child labor back then, but at least the job mattered. Clean water was survival, and every nose and pair of eyes helped. In the end, medieval people understood one simple truth. Safe water was worth any effort, even if it meant hiking miles every day, carrying heavy buckets through mud and rain. They knew the trip to the good pond could mean the difference between life and sickness.